Welcome back. Today, this explainer is taking a seriously unvarnished, investigative look at a highly sanitized chapter of Canadian history. We're digging into the documented romantic history of Pierre Elliott Trudeau. We're going to look right past the polished public relations narratives, the fairy tales really, and examine the stark reality of the power dynamics, the wealth imbalances, and the structural control that actually defined his private life. We're deconstructing the myths, and we're looking strictly at what the documented historical record shows us. So let's get into it. Okay, let's dive into this. For decades, the public packaging of Pierre Trudeau was built entirely around this specific image. You know the one. He was celebrated as the Playboy Prime Minister. He was this man of progressive views, undeniable charm, and youthful vigor. But you have to understand, this was a highly curated public persona. It was literally designed to present his bachelorhood and his eventual romantic pursuits as charismatic and modern. It was a narrative that the public and the press just absolutely ate up, which effectively slapped a very respectable, glamorous mask right over his personal life. But when we contrast that glowing public PR with the documented reality, a completely different picture emerges. What the record actually shows us is a wealthy, incredibly powerful man nearing 50 who has an entirely blank public record of age-appropriate partners. I mean, think about that. Throughout his 30s and early 40s, the decades when people typically form peer-level relationships, there is literally no documented history of a peer-aged partner. Instead, his visible romantic history only really kicks off when he's nearing 50, and when it does, it begins under a thick, heavy veil of extreme secrecy. To really understand this romantic history, we have to look at its famous starting point. We need to deconstruct this so-called managed origin story. I'm talking about the supposed magical chance meeting on a beach in Tahiti in 1967. Let's just look at the raw numbers here as forensic evidence. 47. That was Pierre Trudeau's age during this fateful trip. But, he wasn't just some 47-year-old guy on vacation. He was the sitting Minister of Justice for Canada. He possessed extreme political power, immense wealth, and national prominence. He was a senior figure in the government, and he brought the absolute full weight of that status to this encounter. Now, the crucial point is this next number, 18. This was Margaret Sinclair's age when they met. Now, the official story of this romance is often incredibly fuzzy. They're vague about the exact year, the specific trip, the exact circumstances of how they bumped into each other, yet it is suspiciously precise about this one number. Why? Well, because 18 is the exact legal threshold of adulthood. In a story that's engineered to be hazy everywhere else, this uncomfortably sharp number sits right precisely on the legal line. It functions a lot more like a managed legal defense than a romantic detail, don't you think? Which brings us to the gap, 29 years. I want to pause on this for a second, because this wasn't just a slight age difference. This was a generational chasm. You have a 47-year-old extremely powerful man pursuing a teenager. When you strip away the romantic gloss of that Tahiti fairy tale, what you're left with is an incredibly stark power imbalance that was just completely flattened and frankly excused by his immense political status. The sanitized narrative tells us they were just two strangers who serendipitously met on a beach in French Polynesia. But the structural reality completely exposes the mechanics of this myth. Margaret Sinclair wasn't just a random girl. She was the daughter of James Sinclair, a former Liberal cabinet minister. Trudeau already knew her father. They operated in the exact same tight-knit political network. So we really have to ask ourselves, does a 47-year-old justice minister just happen to stumble into his own party colleague's teenage daughter thousands of miles away? The network got him into the room. The chance encounter on the beach, that was just the respectable cover story. So let's look at what happened next. How did we get from a beach romance to an official position on the government payroll? This relationship didn't just remain a holiday flirtation. No, it was actively managed through the levers of government power. This timeline starkly reveals how proximity was engineered. They meet in 67, right? On their very first date back in Canada, Trudeau casually offers this brand new high school graduate a government job. She drops everything, relocates all the way across the country to Ottawa, and works right in his orbit. He used his immense political capital to add an employer-to-employee dynamic on top of an already massive 29-year age and power gap. He literally placed her on the government payroll. And finally, they marry in absolute secret in 1971, keeping the entire country completely in the dark until the ink was dry on the certificate. Now, you might be wondering, was Margaret an anomaly, or was this the start of a lifelong pattern? Let's take a look at his post-marriage dating history. To understand what happens next, we need to define a really crucial sociological concept known as the man wall. Basically, this is a threshold, usually hitting around age 45, where a man's charm or looks alone are no longer enough to continue accessing and pursuing women in their early 20s. To bypass this wall, a man requires extreme wealth, extreme resources, or extreme power. Well, Trudeau, he had the ultimate national currency, the prime ministership, and he used this immense status as the lever to continually bypass normal age boundaries for the rest of his life. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how he bypassed that wall. Let's just run down the list. With Margaret, he was 47, she was 18. With Barbara Streisand, he was 50, she was 27. With Margot Kidder, he was in his late 50s or early 60s, while she was in her late 20s to early 30s. And with Kim Cattrall, he was in his early 60s while she was 26 or 27. That is a staggering 37-year gap. His target demographic remained completely frozen in their 20s, while he himself aged all the way into his 60s. This was not a series of peer-level romances, folks. It was a fixed fixation on a much, much younger demographic. And it was made possible entirely by his status. But how does a powerful public figure run a lifelong operation like this without facing massive public backlash? Well, they exploit vulnerability, and they build a shield. He operated with a strict, self-enforced shield of secrecy. First off, he demanded absolute discretion from all his partners. He kept his courtship with Margaret an entire secret from the Canadian public until the literal day of their surprise wedding. He leveraged the ultimate political power of the Prime Minister's office to ensure there were no independent records, only the sanitized fairy tales that he explicitly authorized. Furthermore, the man wall is also bypassed by targeting those with a diminished capacity to hold boundaries, by isolating a teenager, moving her across the country away from her support system, and acting as her boss. He capitalized on her youth, her isolation, and later, her publicly documented mental health struggles. He kept these women compartmentalized. That way, they could never compare notes, they could never assemble a wall against him. Which leaves us with this final, critical thought to reflect on. How does society package predatory behavior when it is hidden behind the respectable mask of extreme political power? The documented record shows a powerful man who utilized his party network, his high office, and his absolute authority to pursue an 18-year-old and then spent the rest of his life fixated on women decades his junior, all while being lauded by the press for his youthful vigor. It really forces us to ask, when extreme power writes the history, how long does it take for the fairy tale to fade and for the structural reality to finally show through? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning what you read, and I'll catch you in the next one.